Have you ever had a nightmare in which you felt trapped or faced with some impossible task? Or perhaps an evil entity is stalking you. And in this nightmare, you are forced to go into survival mode. And no matter what you do or what choices you're faced with, the feeling of hopelessness takes over. The terror sinks in. You become paralyzed with fear and forced to surrender to the unknown. Such is the story of Scott Carey, an ordinary man faced with extraordinary circumstances. The story of a man, the incredible shrinking man. Welcome to my Retro Film Podcast. My name is Jaco, and for this episode, I'm going to be talking about the 1957 movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man. Well, this is a movie that I grew up watching with my father way back in the day, and it's one that really stuck with me over time. So this is the story of a man who is pretty ordinary, and he seems to be living a pretty comfortable life. He's married, he takes vacations, and he's got a good job and a good home, and he seems to have a really good life. A man that seems to be pretty much in control of his destiny. But then a cloud of mist descends upon him, and it changes everything he's ever known and everything that he's ever taken for granted. His whole life is just about to go completely into chaos. And that's the entire theme of this movie. A man that has seemingly the perfect life loses it all, and then he searches for purpose with his life as he goes into survival mode. As he begins to shrink, he questions everything. He deals with the emotions of losing control over what's happening to him. He deals with the media attention to the details. He deals with them trying to harass him into interviews. He deals with the question of his own manhood. He deals with the question of whether or not his wife is still going to love him as he continues to shrink. And once he shrinks down to a certain point, he actually goes and seeks comfort with people who are normally that height. These are little people in a traveling circus, and in particular, it's one woman that he seeks comfort with. And he begins to realize that there's hope in the fact that he can live maybe a normal life around other people who understand his perspective. But all that hope is taken away from him in one clean swipe when he realizes that he's still shrinking and there's nothing he can do about it. He eventually gets down to a point to where he's about 6 inches tall and he's living in a dollhouse. Now, at this point in the movie, you could tell that he is a completely changed man. He seems to have no hope at all for ever living any normal life whatsoever. His relationship with his wife has completely deteriorated, and he's lost all purpose in life. Now, this is where the family house cat attacks him, and he has to make a run for his life. And the cat does take a swipe at him and draws blood. His wife comes home and finds a shred of his clothing with blood on it, and she assumes that he's dead. But of course he's not dead. The story can't end there. He just gets trapped in the basement. The basement becomes flooded, and he is continuing to shrink, and he faces all kinds of obstacles down in this basement. This is where he really goes into survival mode. He has to look for food, he has to look for shelter, he has to look for the essential needs to survive, and it's not an easy task when you are as small as he is, which is getting smaller and smaller by the day. At one point, he decides he's going to go for some stale breadcrumbs that are on top of a box, but getting to the top of the box is a task in itself. He gets attacked by a spider, and he has to fight for his life. And it is just one of the most epic scenes you could ever hope to see in a movie of that day. This is where the special effects of the day really take center stage, and you can see a movie that is really far ahead of its time in terms of how they filmed this movie and in terms of the props that they had to build to make this movie happen. It is quite amazing, actually, just to see what all went into the making of this movie. So continuing with the story, his goal becomes to get to the window and maybe escape out of the window so that he can get out of the house and maybe find someone who can help him, somebody who can get him back to his wife at this point. But when he gets to the window, he finds that he can't get through the screen. He is not yet small enough to fit through the holes in the screen. And it's just one thing right after another for Scott. He is just not in control of anything, and he has to accept his fate. And as days go by and he continues to shrink, at some point he is small enough to get through the fence. And when he gets through the fence, he has this epiphany, and it's actually a beautiful monologue. And it's very thought-provoking, and he accepts his fate that he is going to shrink into subatomic levels. And no matter what happens to him, he is surrendering to the unknown. And he is going with the idea that God has a purpose for him, no matter how small that might be. It's actually kind of a beautiful thought to close the movie with. But yeah, it's an awesome movie all the way through. Like I said, it's one that stuck with me for a really long time. I enjoy it, and from time to time, I will put that movie on and watch it and enjoy it for the nostalgia that it brings to my life, because I watched it as a child with my father. But also for the story. As I said, it's a man who seems to have the perfect life. He loses it all. He searches for purpose as he goes into survival mode, and he accepts his fate in the end, and he surrenders to the unknown. And isn't that really a mirror for life in general? There's so much you have to surrender to the unknown, and you just kind of have to accept wherever the road is going to take you in life. No matter how good you have it, and no matter how much privilege you might have in your life, you might have a great job, a great home, a great family, a great wife, everything about it, but how much control you actually have in the long run, there's just so much that's out of your hands in the end. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much you have control over. And so much of the decisions that you're going to make in life are going to result in you surrendering to the unknown and just go in with faith and go in with the idea that there's a purpose for you, and you might not see what that is, and you might not see where it's taking you, but you have to trust that you are going in the right direction, surrender to the unknown, and make the best choices you can as you go down that path. And that's the story of Scott Carey, the Incredible Shrinking Man. Thank you so much for listening. I am Jaco, and I will see you next time.